Tbilisi, Toshkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Portugal, Lahore, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul for A News.
Hello and welcome. I'm James Azimoha and you're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. The US says it has reached a Hamas disarmament deal, but there is no response from Israel. China voices what it calls serious concerns over Washington's latest trade restrictions. And we're in Kyrgyzstan for the Central Asia-Azerbaijan Summit. The US says it has reached a breakthrough agreement aimed at disarming Hamas in Gaza. The deal would see the phased de-weaponization of the group. Hamas says it will depend on Israel's complete withdrawal from Gaza, but Israel has yet to comment.
US President Donald Trump says his administration's Board of Peace has negotiated a plan for the complete disarmament of Hamas and other armed groups in Gaza. According to the proposal, weapons would be surrendered in stages, tunnels dismantled, and Israeli forces would withdraw gradually as agreed benchmarks are met. Security during the transition would be overseen by an international stabilization force, alongside a restructured Palestinian police service. The plan also envisages a technocratic Palestinian administration replacing Hamas as Gaza's governing authority. President Trump described the proposal as a major step towards ending the conflict and thanked Egypt, Qatar and Turkey for helping to mediate the negotiations. However, key questions remain. Hamas has not publicly confirmed that it accepts the disarmament plan. Previous negotiations have shown the group insisting that any discussion of giving up its weapons must be linked to a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. Israel has yet to formally endorse the latest proposal and has consistently maintained that Hamas must be fully demilitarized before any long-term settlement can be reached. The diplomatic announcement also comes as violence continues on the ground. Israeli strikes were reported in Gaza on Thursday, highlighting the gap between political negotiations and the reality of the conflict, despite renewed international efforts to secure a lasting ceasefire.
Now, Saudi Arabia says that 14 countries have backed its plans for a maritime defense force to protect international shipping routes in the Gulf. It says Pakistan, Sudan and Djibouti are among those that have lent support to the proposal. Miriam Zia reports from Islamabad.
Pakistan on Thursday backed a Saudi-led coalition aimed at protecting shipping and energy routes through the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and the Gulf of Aden. 14 countries endorsed the maritime defense deal after a meeting in Riyadh. Saudi Arabia said the alliance will strengthen maritime defense cooperation, safeguard freedom of navigation, and secure international trade and energy supply routes. It described the coalition as purely defensive in nature and said it would operate in accordance with international law. The coalition comes after months of attacks on commercial vessels in the Red Sea forced many ships to reroute around southern Africa, disrupting global supply chains and raising shipping costs. The Bab el-Mandeb carries around 12% of global trade, making it one of the world's busiest maritime choke points. For Pakistan, a significant share of its maritime trade with European market passes through the Bab el-Mandeb and Suez Canal. Securing the corridor also helps safeguard energy imports from the Gulf. The coalition supports Pakistan's wider maritime security interests and reinforces its long-standing strategic and defense partnership with Saudi Arabia. Mariam Zia, A News, Islamabad.
Iran's parliament speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf has issued a strong warning to the United States following a deadly attack on the Gulf island of Qashm. 3 members of the same family are reportedly killed in the strike. Turaj Shivalilu has more.
The Iranian parliament speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf has warned that the US will pay the price over a fatal strike on Iran's Qashm Island on Thursday. The message came after 3 members of a family died after their house was attacked. In the early hours of Thursday, US forces struck the island, located in the Persian Gulf, following a 3-day pause in attacks between Tehran and Washington. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai also slammed the attack, which killed the parents and 2-year-old son of the family of 5. He said it echoed the acts of terrorism committed by the Islamic State, also known as ISIS. In a statement, he said the attack aimed to punish Iran for safeguarding its rights, dignity, and independence. Baghai also said, quote, "Such crimes will never generate authority or credibility for the criminals," referring to the American side. In the latest related development, Iran's army said on Friday that in response to the attack on Qashm Island, it fired kamikaze drones at fighter jet hangars, satellite communication systems, and equipment warehouses belonging to the US military at the Ahmad al-Jaber base in Kuwait. Earlier, the army said it had targeted the Sheikh Isa base in Bahrain by firing Arash suicide drones at electricity generators, navigation systems, and administrative and logistics support buildings of the US military. Turaj Shivalilu from Tehran for A News.
Now, 9 people have been killed in the latest overnight Russian strikes on Ukraine. Kyiv says over 300 missiles and drones were launched across the country. Russia says it has repelled more than 300 Ukrainian drones, as Washington signals it wants to focus on peace rather than expanding military support for Kyiv. Here's more.
Russia's defense ministry says it shot down 371 Ukrainian drones overnight over multiple regions, the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. One of the main cities that appeared to be targeted by Ukraine was Volgograd. Ukrainian drones struck a fuel and energy facility in the south of the city, sparking a fire. Another warehouse belonging to the online retail giant Wildberries was also hit there. Officials say 1 woman was killed after drone debris hit a residential building. 8 people were injured, 2 of them seriously, and windows were shattered in 8 apartment blocks. The attacks also reached Zelenodolsk in Tatarstan, where strikes were reported near Wildberries and Azon logistics hubs. The attacks come as Washington appears to be sending mixed messages on Ukraine. In an interview, President Donald Trump said the United States wants peace, not more missiles. He also said he is not sure whether Washington will grant Ukraine a license to produce ammunition for Patriot air defense systems, calling the technology highly sensitive. At the same time, Trump says his envoy Steve Witkoff and his son-in-law Jared Kushner will travel to Kyiv in the coming days for talks, signaling that diplomatic contacts are continuing even as fighting on the ground intensifies. Dasha Cherneshova for A News in Moscow.
Or as we've been reporting on A News, a Russian missile appears to have entered Polish airspace during an attack on Ukraine this week, prompting Polish and NATO defenses to respond. At the same time, Ukraine is expanding strikes against Russian logistics, oil and industrial infrastructure deep inside the country. For more on this, we're joined by Douglas Davis, co-founder of the Ukrainian Alliance for Medical Exchange and Development. Good to have you, sir.
Thank you, James. It's good to be here.
Thank you. Now, what does this latest missile incursion tell us about the growing risks along NATO's eastern flank?
Well, it says a few things. If you look at the nature of the strikes, it was a combination of ballistics, cruise missiles, and Shahed drone attacks. The Ukrainians intercepted the overwhelming majority of the drones, several of I think the majority of the cruise missiles, but obviously the big gap remains the ballistic missiles. And these strikes included a good number of actually North Korean provided missiles as well. So you're seeing from the Ukrainian side the continued singular major gap that they're facing is the ability to intercept the ballistic missiles, and there were a good number of significant casualties, including a family of 6 in Kryvyi that were killed most likely by ballistic missiles. Then you see it from the NATO side that the Russians are increasingly cavalier and about their incursions into NATO airspace, which reflects one the fact that NATO has not responded vigorously enough against this, and this goes back, well over a year to. I mean, there was the instance last summer where there were 20 to 30 drone incursions, and so now you're seeing actual cruise missiles landing in Poland. The Romanians had to scramble jets to intercept what will almost certainly turn out to be Shahed incursions, but it's showing an increasingly what I would consider desperate nature behind Putin's attacks, which are exploiting really the only significant gap in Ukrainian defenses that still exists, which is the ability to intercept the large proportion of the ballistic missiles, and those ballistic missiles have been targeting civilians and as a part of Russia's ongoing campaign of terror against the Ukrainian civilians, because it's trying to make up for the fact that it's not making any significant gains on the front line in the war of attrition that's going on there, and that there is, in reality, incredible losses for the Russians, asymmetrical losses and shifts in momentum in favor of the Ukrainians along the front line that are being exacerbated by the attacks by the Ukrainians on its logistics and military industrial complex.
Now, Poland was ready to shoot the missile down if it continued its flight. How does NATO decide when an incursion has crossed the threshold for military action?
Well, I think that's a question that hasn't been really adequately answered. This is not, as we just mentioned, the first time these types of incursions have happened, and Russians have shown that they're increasingly cavalier about the degree to which they will take these risks. In part, that's in large part because I believe that NATO has not shown a consistent, vigorous resolve to address this. And I think what many of us would believe is that the best way to address this is to augment support for Ukraine, and that comes from the fact that part of the reasons why the Russians are probably doing this, and this is, a well understood tactic, is the Russians realize that the more that NATO countries are concerned about their own security, the less unified the response of support for Ukraine has been, and there's been withholding of support and of military kit to Ukraine out of concerns by individual NATO countries for their own defense and security. Whereas I think that's probably off target in the fact that the one way to ensure that Russian aggression does not spread beyond the borders of Ukraine is to support Ukraine in terms of it definitively, strategically defeating Russia, which is, as we discussed on our last conversation, the major difference in the warfare we're seeing is obviously the war of attrition along the zero line throughout occupied territories and the Ukrainian front. But the way this war ends is when the capacity for Russia to continue its war machine is exceeded vastly by the cost that's already occurring. That's one of the reasons why some of the actions by Russia and by Putin have been increasingly desperate, because they've failed to achieve the military objectives of securing Luhansk, Donbass, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. They are increasingly under critical pressure within those occupied territories, particularly Crimea. Ukraine has not only secured the Black Sea and forced the Russians to pull back from Sevastopol, but it's now making regular attacks within the Sea of Azov, on the Russian shadow fleets, on the entire complex of how Russia is able to sustain its war machine. And so I view many of these actions that Russia is undertaking more as a sign of desperation, where Russia knows that when it is under pressure, it escalates to de-escalate, because typically NATO and the West has responded to those escalations with increased caution, whereas the more appropriate response would be to increase the pressure even further to secure that strategic defeat of Vladimir Putin.
Finally and briefly, Douglas, if these two trends continue, that is Russian missiles reaching NATO territory and Ukrainian strikes reaching deeper into Russia, where is the greater risk of unintended, beg your pardon, escalation?
Well, I think that goes back to what I was saying, is Russia wants that fear of escalation to drive Western decision making. It wants that fear of escalation to both increase concerns that NATO members should be withholding kit and military support for Ukraine because of their own security defense needs, withholding of the really critical element that the Ukrainians are lacking right now, which is adequate PAC-3 Patriot systems for ballistic missile interception. But I think that the real risk of escalation here is not so much Russian missile incursions or Shahed incursions into countries bordering along Ukraine. I think that the bigger issue is that if Ukraine is not given the support it needs to increase the pressure, the political pressure on Putin in Moscow, we're seeing what I've always seen as the real X factor, is the one thing that continues to drive the war machine. The only reason why Russia can sustain this is because it has become essentially a vassal state of China. And China, of course, has interest in seeing this war continue and to become a continued preoccupation for Europe. And you have North Korea now offering to send an additional 30,000. It shows there's a different way of interpreting this, that the risk isn't of Russian escalation. It's the continuing of this war machine allows for China and actors of support for China to engage in support that will have consequences globally beyond just the European theater.
All right, Douglas, we're out of time. Thank you very much for sharing your time and insights with us.
Thank you so much, James. It's very nice to be here.
Now, meanwhile, Russia has extended its ban on fuel exports until the end of next January, as Moscow seeks to destabilize or stabilize domestic supplies. It comes after months of disruptions across Central Asia. Here's more.
Russia has extended its temporary ban on exports of gasoline, diesel, marine fuel, and gas oil until 31st January 2027. It says the measure is needed to ensure stability on the domestic fuel market. However, from the 1st of September, those same fuels exported directly by producers will be exempt from the restrictions. Supplies that fall under intergovernmental agreements, including deliveries to Uzbekistan, will also be exempt. The impact is already being felt across Central Asia. In Kyrgyzstan, around 95% of fuel imports come from Russia. Supply disruptions have contributed to higher fuel prices and shortages of some grades of gasoline and diesel. Bishkek has responded by introducing an indefinite ban on exports of oil and petroleum products to safeguard domestic supplies. At the same time, it has reached an agreement with Moscow for deliveries of 100,000 tons of fuel every month until the end of the year, with logistics and prices to be yet discussed. Tajikistan is also looking to reduce supply risks. During talks in Astana this week, President Emomali Rahmon and Kasim Jomart Tokayev agreed to work towards increasing exports of Kazakh petroleum products to the Tajik market. Meanwhile, Kazakhstan is negotiating with Russia to process Russian crude oil at Kazakh refineries. Part of the refined oil will go back to Russia and the rest sold domestically. Astana says the arrangement would help keep its refineries operating at full capacity while ensuring stable fuel supplies at home. The talks, as repeated drone attacks have also disrupted operations at the Caspian Pipeline Consortium terminal on Russia's Black Sea coast. It is the main export route for around 80% of Kazakhstan oil exports and shows how the war in Ukraine is reshaping regional energy flows more and more. Sivir Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Now returning to our top story, the U.S. says it has reached a breakthrough agreement aimed at disarming Hamas in Gaza. The deal would see the phased de-weaponization of the group. President Trump credits Egypt, Qatar and Turkey with helping broker the deal. Adam Moore reports from Istanbul.
U.S. President Donald Trump says a breakthrough agreement on the complete disarmament of Hamas and other armed groups in Gaza has been reached with the help of mediators from Egypt, Qatar and Turkey. If implemented, the deal would mark Ankara's biggest diplomatic contribution yet in the Gaza conflict, reflecting months of quiet contacts with Hamas alongside Cairo and Doha. Turkey has consistently positioned itself as a mediator, maintaining communication channels with Hamas while also engaging in Israel, the United States, and regional Arab states. Turkish officials have repeatedly called for a permanent ceasefire, increased humanitarian access to Gaza, and a political settlement leading to Palestinian self-governance. According to Trump, the deal envisages a phased disarmament process, an eventual Israeli military withdrawal, and the establishment of a new Palestinian administration under international oversight. But key questions remain over implementation, verification, and Israel's position, while Hamas has yet to publicly endorse Trump's characterization of the agreement. Turkey has played an increasingly active diplomatic role throughout the conflict, coordinating closely with Egypt and Qatar, both of which have mediated indirect talks between Israel and Hamas. If the new agreement takes effect, it would underscore Ankara's growing influence as a key regional mediator and could represent a significant step towards ending nearly 3 years of violence in Gaza. This is Adam Maro for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
All right, after the break, China has voiced what it calls serious concern over Washington's latest trade restrictions. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching A News. Now, Spain says at least 34 migrants have died trying to reach the Spanish enclave of Ceuta in North Africa. The authorities in Ceuta says about 60,000 migrants have crossed into the territory in the last 24 hours.
Migrants were seen swimming towards the enclave using inflatable tire tubes and other items to help them cross. On arrival, some forced their way through a gate in the border fence and ran into the city. Spain's law enforcement agency confirmed the migrants were entering in large groups from the sea through the Tarajal breakwater and that police had been overwhelmed. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said Spain was deploying all necessary resources and is working with Moroccan and international authorities to restore normality as soon as possible. He and Interior Minister Fernando Grande Marlaska are due to travel to Ceuta to assess the situation. Ceuta is a Spanish enclave on Morocco's northern coast that has remained under Spanish rule for centuries. In response to the situation, Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni says her country could suspend the Schengen open border agreement with Spain. For years, Italy has struggled with waves of illegal migrants onto its territory. Meloni said it poses a threat to European security, calling the latest scenes shocking.
The EU is to establish a maritime rescue center in the Libyan city of Benghazi. The aim is to reduce illegal migration across the Mediterranean from North Africa. The center will be created under the EU's Operation Irini and funded by Italy and Malta. The EU has supported and trained the Libyan Coast Guard for years and has recently expanded contacts with authorities in eastern Libya. EU officials say the cooperation is intended to improve maritime safety, combat smuggling networks, and reduce deaths at sea. Now, wildfire crews are battling major blazes across several countries in Europe. Emergency services in Spain, Greece, and France and the UK are working to stop the flames from spreading as strong winds complicate firefighting efforts.
Wildfires continue to burn across Spain. Conditions have improved slightly in the provinces of Avila and Madrid. However, the fire in Castellón remains out of control. The blaze has burned more than 1,000 square kilometres, with around 10,000 residents unable to return to their homes. A new wildfire has broken out in the Arribes del Duero Natural Park in northwestern Zamora province. More than 1,000 people have been evacuated. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said at least 10 fires remain active across the country. Near the town of Formariz, the fire has spread towards residential areas, with firefighters and local residents working to push back the flames. Tractors are being used to create fire breaks. The wildfire threat also remains high on the Greek island of Lesbos. At least 50 firefighters and 6 aircraft are battling a blaze there. On the island of Crete, 3 firefighters have died as strong winds are causing flames to spread rapidly. Hundreds of residents and tourists have been evacuated to safer areas. And in France, the wildfire risk remains high. The country's interior minister said severe drought and dense vegetation are allowing fires to spread quickly.
The situation leads us to consider that weather conditions have slightly improved with higher humidity levels and a little less wind. However, the reality is that the risk remains extremely high because we are still facing severe drought conditions. As a result, vegetation remains abundant. What we have observed is that yesterday alone, across the national territory, 26 fires had to be dealt with, and these fires can spread very quickly and become very intense.
A wildfire has also broken out on the Suffolk coast in England. Some residents have been evacuated as a precaution.
Now, China has voiced what it calls serious concerns over Washington's latest trade restrictions. The remarks came in a call between the Chinese Vice Premier and the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. Laura Westbrook has more.
Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng, who handles China's economic and trade affairs with the U.S., spoke to U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Trade Representative Jamieson Greer. According to a readout by state media, the Chinese side expressed serious concern over the recent economic and trade restrictions imposed by the United States on China. Now, it described the call as candid, in-depth and constructive, adding that the two sides agreed to enhance communication, build mutual trust and dispel doubt. On social media, Bessent says that he stressed Washington expects Beijing to fully meet its commitments on rare earths and U.S. agricultural products. The U.S. and China agreed to a trade truce that suspended some tariffs and other export controls when U.S. President Donald Trump met his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping last October. But tensions have risen again over fresh U.S. tariffs as President Trump seeks to rebuild his tariff wall. Beijing condemned the 12.5% duties imposed on China over alleged forced labor concerns. The US also imposed new tariffs on 59 other countries. China has also accused the United States of seeking to suppress Chinese companies after Washington issued restrictions on foreign-made robots, citing supply chain vulnerabilities. China was not mentioned directly, but 90% of the world's humanoid robots are made in China. Beijing has vowed to take necessary measures to safeguard the rights and interests of Chinese companies. The move is another point of friction as the world's two biggest economies try to stabilize ties. Experts say while the comments from China show they aren't happy with the restrictions, the call did point to continued preparation for the next leaders' meeting. During his trip to Beijing in May, President Trump invited his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, to the White House for a visit in September. Laura Westbrook for A News in Hong Kong.
Meanwhile, China and the EU are set to hold the second meeting of their trade and investment consultation mechanism in Beijing this autumn. Officials say preparations have been underway since the first meeting in Brussels at the end of June. More than 20 working-level consultations have already taken place, with specialist teams holding detailed discussions on key economic and trade issues. Chinese officials say the objective is to promote balanced growth in bilateral trade and reinforce what they describe as a stable and balanced trading partnership between China and the EU. Now, Pakistan has released hundreds of Afghan nationals from its prisons, with all being repatriated to Afghanistan. It follows the return of over 1,000 Afghan detainees from Pakistani jails last week, as A News correspondent Tamim Bahis brings us more from Kabul.
Afghanistan's Ministry of Refugees and Repatriation says 880 Afghan refugees have been released from prisons in Pakistan and have now returned home. The ministry says the group includes both families and individuals who were detained in Pakistan for various reasons. While the country has not issued a specific statement on this latest release, Islamabad has consistently maintained that Afghan nationals are detained for immigration violations or criminal offences in violation of Pakistani law. Pakistani authorities have also said their ongoing repatriation policy is aimed at addressing illegal immigration and security concerns, and that those without valid legal documents are expected to return to Afghanistan. After arriving in Afghanistan through the Torkham and Spin Boldak border crossings, the detainees were provided with basic humanitarian assistance. They were then taken to their home provinces. The latest returns come against the backdrop of Pakistan's broader campaign to repatriate undocumented Afghan nationals, which has seen hundreds of thousands leave the country over the past 2 years. The policy has drawn concern from international humanitarian organizations, which has called for returns to be voluntary, safe and dignified, given Afghanistan's ongoing economic and humanitarian challenges. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
All right, coming up after the break, we're in Kyrgyzstan for the Central Asia-Azerbaijan Summit. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Now, Kyrgyzstan hosts the Central Asia-Azerbaijan Summit on Friday, focusing on enhancing bilateral relations and economic cooperation. Our Andy Miach is at the venue.
We're coming to you from Cholpon-Ata, Kyrgyzstan's resort town, where the informal consultative meeting of the heads of state of Azerbaijan and the countries of Central Asia has wrapped up. Now, this particular format was established back in November last year, when Azerbaijan was formally admitted into the format of the traditionally C5 grouping countries. This is the first time that Azerbaijan has participated as a full-fledged member. This summit was informal, so that gives you an idea that leaders could speak more openly, more freely, with not so many restrictions imposed by protocol. We've heard some interesting proposal and some quotes here in Cholpon Ata, so let's go through them, and let's start with Azerbaijan, as it is the first time it's participating as a full-fledged member. Azerbaijan's president Ilham Aliyev told the other leaders that Azerbaijan will be an active member of this consultative format, and for its part will make every effort to further expand cooperation and bring the countries and the peoples more close together. He also said that relations with countries of Central Asia are one of the priorities of Azerbaijan's foreign policy. We've also heard in the opening remarks from Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, who said that Central Asia is experiencing the most successful period in its modern history. He said that Azerbaijan's accession as a full participant in this consultative meetings format marks a new stage in the evolution of the format. He spoke of the region's growing importance and louder voice on the global stage, also adding and reminding everyone about Kazakhstan's election as a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. We've heard some proposals. Tajikistan's President Emomali Rahmon proposed establishing a great oil refinery in Central Asia. He made the proposal referring to the ever popular issue of energy security. We've heard from the host, the Kyrgyz President Sadir Japarov, who proposed introducing a single tourist visa for foreigners wishing to visit Central Asian countries, so that they would not have to take out visas for every single one of the countries. Now, this summit, the opening part was that was the main parts that we could hear in the opening remarks. Of course, the leaders had a plentiful agenda of things to discuss, including trade within the region, transport links. As we know, the Middle Corridor, the trade route connecting China to Europe, has become the most popular way to transfer goods that way, and that route goes via Central Asia and South Caucasus, and then on to Europe. Now, before this summit, there was another event here in Cholpon Ata. It was the official welcoming ceremony for Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev, who is here on a state visit. He met with his Kyrgyz counterpart Sadir Japarov for talks. The two sides signed a number of documents, but one of the documents that stands out is the Treaty of Allied Relations. Now, this document was signed. Of course, it needs to be ratified, but it will take the relations between Azerbaijan and Kyrgyzstan from the level of strategic partnership where they were since 2022 to the highest possible level, the level of an alliance. The two presidents then exchanged the highest state awards, orders. They gave them to each other. And that is pretty much a busy week here in the resort town on the shore of Kyrgyzstan's Issyk-Kul Lake. From us here in Cholpon Ata, that'd be all for now.
For more on Azerbaijan's deepening relationship with Central Asia, let's bring in our Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Orhan Amashov. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, James.
Now, what do these latest agreements tell us about where Azerbaijan-Central Asia relations are heading?
Well, Azerbaijan is already considered to be part of Central Asia. Technically, previously, before December 2025, everybody was talking about Central Asia Plus format, because Central Asian countries, all of them, 5 of them, they have been, for many years, even decades, have been advancing their relations with external actors on the basis of Central Asia Plus format. And similar pattern was applicable to Azerbaijan. Now, as of December 2025 in Tashkent, decision was taken to make sure Azerbaijan is part of this format, no longer outsider, no longer a guest, no longer participating in a guest capacity, but actually part of it. And it's very important because basically Central Asia and Azerbaijan and South Caucasus are widely considered to be part of the self-same region. It is important in the context of Azerbaijan in particular, bearing in mind that in early 2024, President Aliyev of Azerbaijan said that Azerbaijan has only one family, that is a Turkic family. That is a central foreign policy imperative for Azerbaijan over the past few years. Since resolution of the Karabakh problem, effectively, since Azerbaijan restored its territorial integrity and sovereignty over the remainder of Karabakh, Azerbaijan has been incredibly active in different international organizations, and the Central Asian element has been amplified after that very period. We remember as the Organization of Turkish States became an international organization in 2021, and all of these bilateral, trilateral formats involving Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan have been advancing since that very point. It's a very critical point. It's an informal meeting. Joint declaration reflects on connectivity, basically creating a common space. I would describe Central Asia-Azerbaijan format as a convergence of bilateral, trilateral formats, interaction with different international organizations, and the creation of a common space on the basis that Caspian Sea should not be seen as a dividing sea, but a connection sea of connection. And all of the developments taking place in relation to Russia, Iran, only amplify and augment this very centrality of this very point.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking about connectivity, could the new regional connections make Central Asian economies less dependent on traditional routes, for example, through Russia?
Absolutely. I mean, Central Asia is a big region, of course. Kazakhstan is the biggest country there. Central Asian countries have been navigating very complex geopolitical landscape involving China, because Chinese economic presence in Central Asia is absolutely massive. It's increasing incrementally to the detriment of Russian economic influence. Russia is still economically and politically influential, but this particular importance of Russia is in decline. We noticed that. And naturally, of course, the US is interested in this region, in particular in the context of extraction of raw materials. So you see the battle happening there. So what Central Asia needs to increase its geopolitical autonomy. And that could only happen if they act in line with Azerbaijan, because if you want to be autonomous, if you want to be valuable from the context of both China and Europe, you need to cooperate with Azerbaijan. There are historic, linguistic factors uniting Azerbaijan with Central Asian countries. Out of 5 countries there, 4 are Turkic countries. They're also members of the Organization of Turkic States. And also what we have noticed over the past couple of days and even past couple of months, we have noticed that CPC, the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, was attacked by Ukrainian drones. This effectively means that any connectivity puzzle located within the scope of Russia is no longer reliable. And Trans-Caspian Middle Corridor, basically pipelines, energy lines connecting Central Asia with Azerbaijan, which effectively connect China with Europe via South Caucasus, should be augmented. I think that all of the developments, what happened regarding CPC, attacks on Iranian vessels in the Caspian, they all point to that very central role of Middle Corridor connecting Central Asia with Azerbaijan via the Caspian.
Now, speaking about cooperation with Azerbaijan and Kyrgyzstan have now signed a treaty on allied relations. What does this move add to the partnership beyond the economic agreements already in place?
Well, Azerbaijan and Kyrgyzstan, or Kyrgyz Republic, officially known as Kyrgyz Republic, have signed a number of bilateral documents over the past couple of decades. Being an ally with another country is a very specific moment. You could be a strategic partner. You could be enhanced strategic partner. For example, Azerbaijan has got enhanced strategic partnership with China, for example. But allied interaction or allied relations constitute a completely different level. It means that any attack against your sovereign territory will induce certain reaction from another country. It means that when you're dealing with international affairs, you take into account your common interests. It means that you are laying the foundation for common market eventually. Whether you will reach the common market objective or not, but actually what you're doing leads to that, because harmonization, logistics, transport, custom harmonization all lead to that common space. And about Kyrgyzstan, yes, it's a very important moment, because Azerbaijan has got this treaty-based allied relation with Uzbekistan. That treaty was ratified back in 2024. With Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan signed back in 2005 Treaty on Strategic Partnership and Allied Relations, and then in 2022 another document. But it is not really treaty-based allied relations, but we can politically refer to Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan as allies. And now with Kyrgyz Republic, with Turkmenistan, strategic partnership, and same applies to Tajikistan. So basically, this sort of relations, trilateral, bilateral formats, lead to the alliance within a wider region known as Central Asia, Azerbaijan.
Now finally, Orhan, if we return to this relationship in 3 years, what would you expect to see that is not there today?
Well, over the past 3 years, relations, of course, naturally have improved massively. But what I expect, I'll give you one example. Let's say I was in Avaza. By the way, the next meeting, consultative meeting of heads of state of Central Asia, Azerbaijan will take place in Avaza, which is Turkmenistan. I was there last year in August. There was a trilateral meeting involving Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Azerbaijan. Basically, Azerbaijan has got strategic relations with Turkmenistan, allied interaction with Uzbekistan. This effectively means that bilateral, trilateral formats converge, create a common space, and you've got this regional alliance of global significance. That's what I expect will happen in the coming years.
Orhan, thank you very much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you, James.
All right, Georgia's future in finance and infrastructure has received a major boost, with 2 international lenders stepping in. The Asian Development Bank approved a $250 million loan for a new bypass around Tbilisi, while the World Bank greenlit a $35 million safety net for the country's banking sector. Nini Nikolashvili has more.
Georgia has just received a major boost to its infrastructure and financing. The Asian Development Bank has approved a $250 million loan to build a highway bypass around Tbilisi. The project covers a 4-lane highway stretching across nearly 19 kilometers, stretching from Tbilisi Airport through Lotchini to Rustavi. It's part of the East-West Highway that connects Georgia and is a key part of a corridor that links Central Asia to Europe. The bank's country director says the bypass will ease congestion, cut travel time, and make freight transport more reliable. The ADB has already put over $2.3 billion into Georgia's roads, including the Batumi and Kobuleti bypasses. Meanwhile, the World Bank is offering additional support to the country by approving a $35 million credit line for Georgia's Resolution Fund. This fund is designed to offer help if a commercial bank runs into serious trouble by covering costs to restructure rather than shut it down. The agreement was signed by Finance Minister Lasha Khutishvili and World Bank Regional Director Roland Price. Georgia's National Bank President Natia Turnova called it confirmation that the country's bank resolution framework meets international standards. The World Bank money won't be touched under normal conditions. It only activates if the National Bank formally decides that a bank needs help. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Now, an international art exhibition titled Crossroads of Cultures has opened as part of the ongoing Gebele Fest. The display brings together over 30 artists from 11 countries, including China, Germany, South Korea, and the United Kingdom, showcasing paintings, sculptures, and photography. A News' Dilek Tuna is at the venue.
Hello, we're here in beautiful Gebele. One of the newest additions to this year's Gebele International Music Festival is an exhibition that's bringing together artists from around the world under one roof. Called Crossroad of Cultures, it features more than 30 artists from countries including Azerbaijan, the United Kingdom, Germany, China, Turkey, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and South Korea. Through painting, sculpture, and photography, the exhibition explores how art can connect different cultures, traditions, and generations. But this isn't simply an exhibition where visitors look at works hanging on the wall. There are interactive installations inviting people to become part of the creative process, alongside masterclasses led by internationally recognized artists, giving both adults and children the opportunity to discover new techniques and express their own creativity.
More than 30 artists, local and global, and they come from 11 different countries. And it's been incredible to work with such a rich variety of artists and bring them together. The exhibition has been designed to mimic a crossroads with different journeys that viewers can take. And a good plan behind this exhibition is for the artists and me as a curator to really bridge that gap between Azerbaijan and the UK and have a cross-cultural dialogue.
I use tiny little figures that I paint and put into little box frames and make scenes. My workshop here is the people are choosing figures that look like themselves, and then they paint them with tiny paintbrushes and choose. I have 4 images from this area that they choose one as a backdrop.
The ancient Silk Road are recurring themes throughout the exhibition, reflecting both Azerbaijan's artistic traditions and the wider international dialogue the festival hopes to encourage. As Gebele Fest continues, the exhibition is adding another dimension to the festival, reminding visitors that while music may be at its heart, this celebration is also about bringing together different forms of art, creativity and cultural exchange. From Gebele, Dilek Tuna, Natik Mehmedov, for A News.
All right, that's all we have for now. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.